Well, it's nice to see you all. It's rather a big day at the Department for Education today because we've announced our priority school building programme. And this has been something we've been on the brink of announcing really for quite some time, and I've been forbidden from talking about it for about the last year. So when I wrote this speech today, I didn't mention it. And when we went through the rehearsals this morning, I didn't mention it again because I'm so used to being forbidden to talking about it. But I can tell you now that today we've announced we're going to be rebuilding 261 of the schools in the worst condition in England. So that's great news for them. It's great news for their communities. And they'll be built to a good acoustic standard. We've rewritten our acoustic standard with the help of the Institute of Acousticians and the Association of Noise Consultants. So those new schools, we built to those new standards. So the children learning there should be fine. So that's a good news story. However, in England, there are about 25,000 schools. That's including all the primary, all the secondary, and all the independent schools as well. So for those 261, it's good news. For the 700 that receive money through BSF or the Academies framework, they're fine as well. But we've still got about 24,000 schools that haven't received government money directly for major rebuilding or refurbishment projects. So I want to talk to you this evening about what we're doing for those schools. So on that, it's a bit difficult to call our government new anymore. But from the point of view of the civil service, it is still quite new. We're into our second year of term now. And so some of the policies that the coalition government wanted to implement when they came in, we're now really starting to get to grips with what they wanted, what that's going to mean in practice, and what we're actually going to do. And one of their major overarching ambitions was to reduce the amount of regulation and the amount of bureaucracy that government applied to normal day-to-day life. So they wanted to look across all government regulations and try and reduce them as much as possible and try and free up people who were at work at the coalface into making decisions for themselves. So they did things that they thought were a good idea because they thought they were a good idea rather than the fact that government was dictating what should actually happen. So each department was charged to go off and do that. And in my corner of the civil service, we looked at the regulations that apply to school premises because they are government regulations, and we were definitely under instructions to reduce the burden of regulation that we applied to schools and to school buildings. So we went and we did that, and we examined the regulations that were in existence. And we looked in particular for matters that were also covered by other bits of law or other bits of legislation, because there was an ambition to remove duplication. So I spent a long time looking at the Health and Safety at Work Act, employers' liability, interesting things like that, and seeing where there was crossover from those bits of legislation to things that were coming out from the Department for Education. So we made proposals, we had a consultation period, and now that's all complete. And we are about to launch a new set of regulations in September. Now, it's an interesting distinction between regulations and guidance. And our current government considers them to be pretty much the same. So even though not everything's written in law, if it's written in guidance and it's got a government stamp on it, people will probably think they have to do it, so they probably will. So there's an expectation of real and apparent regulations. And so we're having to tackle that as well and reduce the amount of guidance that we produce as well as the amount of regulations that we set. So really it's been quite a challenge because in the education field, there's quite a lot of guidance because over the decades that we've been building schools, there's been an accumulation of best practice, case studies and things that we think are generally a good way of doing things. And to some degree it had got rather shaggy, so it was quite refreshing in some ways to look back at that and say, right, how do we pare this back to something that's really clear and really assist people in doing a good job? So that was the brief we set ourselves. So the conclusion that we've come to is that there are going to be 8 items that are subject to regulation for schools. Now, we used to have 24, and those 24 covered every aspect of a school premises. And again, they were applicable to all schools at all times. It wasn't just about new schools. And our guidance, our Building Bulletin 93, was particularly aimed at new schools and schools that were having building work or that were having major refurbishment. But the school premises regulations apply to all schools all the time, including independent schools. So it's quite a different situation. So we used to regulate on 24 things. Now we're only going to regulate on 8, and we really had to make a very strong case for all of those 8 things to be included. And those 8 matters are things where there is a special case for schools to have their own regulation clearly articulated, be that because children or young people have a special need, or because there are unusual or important things that we particularly want to get right. And as Adrian said, when Building Bulletin 93 came in 2004, there was a hue and a cry from the construction industry about this appalling burden that they'd been placed on. So it felt that acoustics was quite a vulnerable issue in this whole project. But I'm pleased to tell you that acoustics has survived the cull, and it is one of the 8 matters that will be a continued subject of regulation. But it doesn't end there. It becomes rather subtle at that point, because if you're applying a regulation to all schools that must apply all the time, then the way that that's articulated is quite important. So I'm going to read to you what the wording of the regulation is. And this is it. It's one sentence. And it says, the acoustic conditions and sound insulation of each room or other space must be suitable, having regard to the nature of the activities which normally take place therein. So it all hangs on the definition of what is suitable for what you're doing at any particular place with a particular group of people at a particular time. And we haven't just left it at that. You'll be pleased to hear. There is some further explanation about what that might mean and how a school might comply. And our guidance will still exist. But the guidance, again, is particularly aimed at people who are doing new building projects or major refurbishment. So it's got all the numbers in that the acousticians need to refer to. But the regulation itself is aimed at lay people who, I say that rather patronizingly because I'm an architect, but for people who are running schools, so their teachers, their governors, they need to understand what this means and what their duties are under this regulation. So we go on to say, aside from it being suitable, we say good sound quality. It says, in a school with a good acoustic environment, people would experience good sound quality. And we define this by it will enable people to hear clearly, understand and concentrate on whatever activities they're involved in. And they should have minimal disturbance from unwanted noise, such as activities in adjacent areas, teaching equipment, ventilation fans, or road traffic. So all the things we've been talking about today. And again, there is a bit of a fuller explanation, but I'm going to leave it there. So the regulation doesn't say that every room's got to meet the guidance. It just says it's got to be suitable for what happens there. So what? So who will go and check whether that's actually the case or not? So if a new school's opening, which our government has an ambition, there are many new schools opening because the Free Schools initiative is a very big policy for them. If a new school's opening, then before the first children arrive, Ofsted will inspect the premises and they will take a view about whether the school premises regulations are being met in that place or not. So before it opens, it should be deemed okay. After that, it's a matter for the teachers, really, to decide what they want to do in a given space and what that space should be like in order to set the correct acoustic conditions for what's going on there. And again, I want to refer back to the point I made earlier about the ambition to put power in the hands of people at local level who are affected by these decisions. Alongside this desire to deregulate, you'll also be noticing in the news that we're having an increased number of academies being declared. So schools are declaring themselves free of local authority control and therefore able to spend their own budgets in the way that they think is best. So therefore the decision about do we want to add acoustic treatment to this room actually will be made by the people who run that school and the people who know the cohort of pupils and who know the parents and can make decisions about the best way to deploy the resources that are available to them. So you can see the direction of political travel is a bit different from what we might have been used to before. And again, it's looking at a much kind of finer grain of making decisions and using resources appropriately. But what that means is that anyone who's got the power to make those decisions needs to be informed about what the best thing to do is. So I think today's discussions this evening are really important, that we, as the many professions that are here, are able to articulate what we mean by what's a good environment and how we reach out to the people who are working in schools and have power over their budgets about why it's important to improve the acoustic condition of some spaces and as many spaces as possible. And within this, I also want to mention parents, because again, another ethos, another strand in this is the concept of parental choice and the idea that not all schools are the same and not all children are the same. And as a parent, you are, potentially a consumer, and it should be possible for you to choose a school that you think is best for your child. And so if you think that your child has particular acoustic needs, or you think that the acoustics in classrooms are particularly important, then again, you would need to be informed of that and be able to understand what makes one school different from another and have sufficient choice locally so that you could say, right, actually, I want my child to go to that school rather than that one. So again, the burden of knowledge and the burden of choice is moved down to a more fine-grained local level. And again, that gives us a responsibility to communicate with those people who are making those choices so that they feel that they understand the consequences of that choice and are able to make an informed decision when it comes to them. So that's the kind of the larger picture. So we still have regulations. Acoustics is still one of those, and we still have guidance as well. But you can see that the change in government from where we were under the Labour government to where we are now under the coalition government, it does have a different flavour. But again, it's putting the hands in the power of people who are most affected by that decision.